We're starting number 10 video, reading my book, Molasses Moon. And we're into the letter here on my Amazon Kindle Fire. To the Jeff Herman agency again. Okay, let's see. Get a little bit more comfortable today and see how that works. I'm not covering my microphone here. So, how was your day? Okay, here we are, March 8th, 1994. The Jeff Herman Agency, New York, New York. 100183. Dear Mr. Herman, received your note of 228 yesterday. I'm glad you like keeping in touch, as I like the idea myself. Being unknown in my field, I work in a dark vacuum. You and your guides provide a welcome, warm glow. You asked what it means to glow in the dark. As I've said a couple times, you do. I'm referring to my 1218 cover letter for my manuscript submission, New Moon Blues, in which I stated, "You've passed my requirements for an agent with colors flying so high you glow in the dark." I was making a play there to colors so bright as to be iridescent. I'm not sure what type of filing system you keep, or if you're reading my 8 letters, including one mailed March 2nd about Molasses Moon, all to one person, me. I thought you might be, since you noted my weird name in your first response, requesting to see some of my work. I've also written blurbs about your astrological makeup. In a nutshell, I'm not sure what type of continuity I've got going in your memory so far, but your responses show you've read my letters. Thanks. Since you're a hard-working professional perfectionist, I'm sure your books will continue to improve, as you said in your note you want them to. You closed your note, "Stay warm." Yes, sir, I'm heating up quick. Dry humor in the nonfiction molasses. This 3/8 letter goes in the manuscript chapter 6. My 3/2 letter explains. Since we crossed the mails in an interesting pattern, by the time you receive this, you will have probably written to say, "I must see it, Molasses Moon." Do you like gingerbread? Temperatures rising. And then I sign and start the text again of my book. It seems Jeff Herman draws special dates to himself. His birthday, December 17th, is the day The Rose in the Pyramid was first published. I was hoping his advice in his books, if not his efforts as my agent, would rectify that unfortunate event of the presentation of The Rose in a sadly unprofessional format. I'm sure Herman's birth was was fortunate, though I don't know if he came out of the womb as a ready-made professional. March 8th, the date of the above letter to Herman, is Tom's and my anniversary. We went to Buffmax for breakfast and Mr. C's for dinner, going our separate ways to work in between. Which reminds me, I've written most of the local cafes into my novels, as they fit purpose or plot. The Capri, the restaurant Tom and I nearly live in, has not been honored yet. I don't want to slight the restaurant that's been in Florence longer than I can remember. It's one of the few places other than Buffmax where you can get good, basic meals for the same price as buying groceries and cooking yourself. A note from the present on my Facebook wall. I've also been recently including photos of also these local restaurants now in 2011 and 12 that I use for writing settings whenever I'm in the local area instead of at Tom's mine site, which is about a 3-hour drive from our home in Rockville. Okay, continuing. Where you can get food, basic meals for the same price as buying groceries and cooking yourself. You cook the food, not yourself. Cannibalism is bad enough if you're eating someone else. I'll take my foot out of my mouth and get back to the point. There's the reasonably priced Iron Horse, too, which played quite a role as the Good Times Cafe in Morning Comes. It does depend. Oh, and I also did have a photograph of that restaurant. It's now the Jade Cafe, a Chinese decor restaurant with excellent Chinese food. It does look a lot different, though, than it did when I was writing it into Morning Comes and called it the Good Times Cafe, which it was in reality called the Iron Horse. Okay, back to the book. It does depend on what type of groceries you buy and what you eat or order off the menus. I'm hoping the Capri gets itself in my way when I'm writing one of these days, so I can capture its old shoe hominess in print. I do work usually reviewing something I've written or planning something I'm going to write in that second home often, when Tom and I have breakfast or supper there, which is usually what you do in a restaurant, right? Unless you're having coffee or lunch, or unless you work there, or unless, well, never mind. Extensive honesty can get you terribly sidetracked, especially when you're trying to get someone's old shoe out of your mouth. Speaking of plugging restaurants, Buffmax has an interesting history. Before Richard Buffmack bought the place, it was the malt shop, the cafe, ice cream parlor, bakery, and bus depot where my mom and aunts, Mary and Annie, made the first sloppy joes to satisfy earth-based taste buds. The quirks of that story are laced, maybe I should say sloughed, throughout my Sun and Moon books. I guess praising the Esquivel novel has stimulated my saliva glands, making me write about food and restaurants all of a sudden. Probably that and the egg sandwich I just finished. I added this section about cafes and Herman's timelines during reviews mentioned below. Backtracking before our March 8th anniversary, I'll note who's had a chance to read some of the Molasses Moon manuscript. On March 2nd, I mailed Chapter 1 to friends Mary and Gary Brown, and 1 through 5 to Dale Ward. On March 1st and the 3rd, I mailed copies of recent query letters to my friend Barbara Moore, hoping to pique her interest. You know I mailed Chapter 1 to Jacqueline Onassis, no response. I also gave, hot off the press in February, the first chapter to my mom and my nephews. And Tom has now read the 1st and 5th chapters. If I get any feedback, I'll let you know. You can compare it with your own taste for molasses. So far, the people who have finished what I gave them to read, my nephew Lonnie's response was, "It's quite a change from your other books." Tom's response to Chapter 5 was, "If all your books were like this, I'd probably want to read them." My other books aren't that bad. He liked The Rose and The Seed, and Morning Comes when it was still collecting history. He liked it better before I made several billion revisions and expanded it from a 300 to a 500-page manuscript, trying to make it literary. It's just that Tom prefers cartoons and quantum mechanics to fiction. Like many guys, he doesn't like romance novels for sure. And look how many people buy and eat those books. When Tom's in the mood for fiction, he leans to mining or railroad stories. Taste is unique and personal. My mom would rather I write mysteries for TV. All I can say is I wrote what I had to write, my own way. I was writing for you. I should note that no one has read all my work. That was in 1994. Now, I've had a few people read all of my published work. And I've mentioned them in the books, too. I'd rather have it read in book format rather than in bulky, clumsy, unstable manuscript form. I make so many revisions, readers would get tired of repeating the same page over and over and over, with minor changes. Today, March 9th, I bought the first 5 chapters and the Esquivel letter to Mrs. Morelli Today, March 9th, I brought the first 5 chapters and the Esquivel letter to Mrs. Morelli at the library. I showed her my copy of Like Water. Earlier today, Tom and I were having lunch in Pueblo at Stuffy's, after having picked up some parts from the John Deere dealer, Colorado Machinery, for a backhoe Tom's working on. The restaurant has changed names and owners a few times, somewhat like my manuscripts, though I've always owned them, just under various names. 1 or 2 owners ago, in the spring of 1990, Tom and I paid $800 for a 57 Mack truck to rebuild to eventually replace the 72 International he uses as a mobile shop for his heavy equipment repair business. Hibernating in a junkyard in Pueblo, the yellow oldie surprised us with its ability, questionable as it was, to start up and run, not too fast, and not without black diesel smoke billowing in abundance from its stack. From a distance we were likely mistaken for a steam engine. Other wise vehicles did remain at a distance. I followed the Mack, which Tom was driving, in our Bronco. It was good we drove the 37-mile distance from Pueblo to Rockville in the dark, night hiding some of the smoke. I couldn't see the Mack's taillights through the ebony cloud, nor could I see much else. I figured if I stayed in the densest part of the airborne soot, I'd be safely on the highway behind the Mack. Yes, my eyes did burn. Over a 6-month period, piece by piece, we had the body of the truck restored and painted shiny black by CJ's Paint and Body. After Tom took it apart down to the frame, he reassembled it, replacing or repairing whatever needed immediate attention. We recommend CJ's Metal Magician. He hates painting with black, but turned out our Mack in professional perfection anyway. Tom says a 5-cent bolt fixed the engine. I say his skill to see the bolt did it. Back to Stuffy's, where we had stopped for supper back in 1990, before taking the uncomfortable, because we didn't know the Mack could make it, 37-mile journey down Highway 50 home. This March 9, 1994, having reached the edge of a eureka about the line separating matter, consciousness, quarks, quantums, and qualms, I was attempting to explain the barely oozing idea to Tom. I told him it was like grabbing an eel with snot on my hands. His attention to my eel wrestling wasn't what you'd call focused or enthusiastic. Realizing he was in his own world of tumbleweed repair customers' machinery, I shut up, dropped my qualms, and fell back into a review of Molasses Moon, while he drew back into his heavy equipment parts sales catalog. Reaching the part in Chapter 5 about being dead without an ego and wondering how to interest someone in something you're doing, I flash to what I know and keep forgetting. Start from their ego. Start from where they are, if you want to bring them to where you are. Yeah, I think that's a good pausing point this time again. So where are you? You know where I am. And we'll see you next time. This was 10. And the next video reading, if I'm still alive and you're still alive, I guess will be number 11.